Thanks for tuning into the For Those Made to Do podcast. We are your hosts, Mandy Sahota
and Bianca Pavel. This podcast is all about the doers who have achieved career success in the UAE and the stories that go with it.
In this episode of For Those Made to Do Executive Transitions, we have the pleasure of speaking to Jo Kearney, Chief L&D Officer. We sit down with Jo to unpack why up to 45% of executive transitions fail, what you should focus on if you're growing from within the organisation, as well as sharing some tips on how to tackle joining an executive level role from outside the organisation.
If you'd like to learn more about the power of adaptive leadership, the important social influence plays in the age of AI, and what executives should ask companies for to ensure they get enough support in their transition, tune in with us. We hope you enjoy it. Hello everyone, and welcome back to Season 2 of For Those Made to Do. Mandy and I are so excited to have all of you tune back in for more stories of doers in the Middle East.
Hi everyone, thank you for joining us for Season 2. We have lots of awesome guests lined up for you. This season will be just as exciting as Season 1. We'll keep focusing on how technology is changing the world of work, but we'll also take a closer look at what happens at the top level where executives operate.
So with that in mind, we'll kick things off with a very insightful conversation on executive transitions. With so many experienced workers deciding to switch careers or functions or industries, and of course, we're in the aftermath of the Great Resignation. So today we want to take a closer look at how experienced professionals are making decisions about their careers, how they can be more successful in the process, and also what companies can do to support them more with that transition. To answer all these questions and more, we have our friend Jo Kearney in the studio today, who is the Chief Learning Officer at a UAE-based conglomerate with 46,000 global employees, so massive, and who has previously helped companies like Meta and Accenture to develop their workforce and support their executive transitions. So Jo, welcome. We're so excited to have you with us. How are you this morning?
I am excellent. Thank you so much for having me here. I feel very honoured that you've asked me to join. And it's a great day. Dubai sunshine, all good?
Yes,
awesome.
Exactly.
Thanks for coming.
It's a really nice way to start the week. It is a Monday. Would you be able to start by just telling us a little bit about you and your career trajectory in L&D and how you support executives in their transitions?
Yeah, I'd love to. God, it takes me down memory lane. I think I've always just been in love with learning. You know, when I was younger, my first jobs were providing tutoring outside of school. I was just always fascinated with how people learned, why they learned, what learning could do for you, the doors it could open up for you. And when I went to university, my first degree was linguistics. And at times I berated myself that I didn't do something that had a direct, impactful, high value money correlation. But now I'm really proud of myself that I did something that I loved learning. And as soon as I left, I thought I'll become a lecturer. That learning thing was just always there inside of me. And for some reason, didn't really enjoy it. Maybe I was too young. Maybe the feedback loop wasn't there. But started consulting. And I said, it seems like what you do when you don't know what you want to do. And I said, I'll figure it out when I grow up. Turned out I never really grew up, but I started consulting and I thought just do this for a year or two. And I managed to get into the human capital space, strategic learning, leadership development, executive development. And I just fell in love with it. I got to work with the most interesting clients from Silicon Valley to Sydney, Singapore, Saudi. And I've just had a blast really helping people kind of discover what's inside of them.
Where was the pivotal moment where you learned, okay, hang on a minute, there's a gap or there's an area of emphasis when it comes to executive transitions and how to support them?
I think I had the opportunity to do a lot of further study, and I did some further study in the US. And it really opened my eyes to the fact that when I was learning, the way I was learning the most at pace was from people around me. From my surroundings, from the comments others were making, from imitating behavior. And it made me realize that really the way in which we learn or think we learn is so skewed. Most people focus on that 10% in the classroom. That's how I learn. But really it's those social connections, tying back to kind of Bandura's social learning theory around how we actually learn. And I think it was that moment when I realized that transitions within an organization are really the killer app for learning. It's incredible when I work with leaders who've had these portfolio careers, who've made these transitions. They're much more able to understand the whole ecosystem of business, and they're much more potent in their roles. And I think it's been helping people to realize that the power lies within them, because there can be this imposter syndrome, there can be this lack of confidence about moving. But helping people to understand you're going to be a beginner, which is going to feel really hard at your level, because you've been working 20, 30 years, but ultimately it will pay off.
That's interesting, isn't it? Because imposter syndrome, do you see it at every level? It doesn't matter how high up the food chain you are, that it never leaves you. Do you see that as a thing?
Absolutely. I see it in myself,
and
I see it in every level. And I see it most predominantly in people that shock me because they're so competent at what they do. It really is so pervasive across genders, probably most predominantly in women. But sometimes there is this excessive humility. And I really believe in humility. We all, especially at the moment in this post-COVID era, with the kind of geopolitical crises around us, you do need to have this level of humility, but sometimes it can be excessive. And that's actually something I work with my own coach on, kind of standing into what you know and owning it a little bit better.
It is continuous improvement, because that voice in your head, the thing that's going to make or break you. So the fact that you're tuning into it and just being aware of it, I think then you can navigate it a little bit better as well, I think.
And Jo, did you notice that there's any difference in people as they make an executive transition when they come from inside the organization versus from the outside? What would you say are the main similarities and differences there?
It's a really interesting question, because there's no right answer. There's just trade-offs. And typically we see in internal transitions that people acclimatize to the new role almost 50% quicker. So obviously that has a huge benefit in kind of going from door to floor, time to productivity, how quickly someone can start accelerating their value add to a company. But what it can, I guess, what it doesn't offer, and the trade-off, is that when you have an external transition, so you bring someone in from a different industry, maybe they come in from aviation to property, they bring in a really fresh way of thinking, renegade ideas, the ability to be non-conformist, to challenge. And if they do that in the right way, that's also very powerful. So I think you need to get that balance right and think about, if we're looking for a role, I mean, all roles should really have an element of innovation, but if it's a really, really innovative space, it's definitely worth looking outside at times, as much as I really believe in nurturing talent from within.
And when companies nurture that talent from within, I think I've heard you talk about an incubation period for effective succession. Can you just tell us a bit more about what that looks like and how different companies can take it and implement it?
Yeah. So this is an interesting one. And I think the most interesting thing about that incubation period, I have found personally, even my own transition over to the Middle East 18 months ago, is the patience with yourself to be a beginner. Once you are an SME, an expert in something, you just want to rush at something, but really slowing down. You know, there's this phrase, you got to go slow to go smooth, and go smooth to go fast. Taking the time to ask questions, be a beginner, be humble, ask for advice, accept that failure is going to be a key part of your journey. That's a key part of your individual incubation period, and something that I think people find the hardest. I also think organizations, some do it really well, and some could step up a little bit better. Even simple things like 30, 60, 90-day onboarding plans, giving people the freedom to talk to people, to have listening tours, enable them access to data, whether it's qualitative or quantitative, but also say that, you know, set the expectation that in your role, I'm expecting you to not know everything, but I'm expecting you to bring in fresh ideas. And this idea of that's just how we do things around here is something that I think in the incubation period we can get rid of a little bit and say, well, I'm actually going to bring in some outside-in thinking.
And zooming in on that idea of failure, there's a study by McKinsey which looks at defining success and failure in executive transitions, and they kind of have two different metrics for internal and external transitions. And with the case of internal transitions, they say that up to 35% of executive transitions actually fail. They either don't meet the criteria or they fail altogether, versus up to 47% of the external transitions tend to fail. Now, there's a big question there around how do you define success and failure in an executive transition, and what's the time period for that? But what are your initial thoughts to these numbers? Because they sound really high. It's quite a lot of risk for a company to even engage in a transition when almost half the time they don't meet expectations or they fail altogether.
Yeah, it's a really interesting statistic. And in some geographies, I've seen it even higher.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it really shows the duty of care that we have as employers to really take care of our people, to onboard them well, to pre-onboard them well, to make sure they have access to the people, the resources, the knowledge, the coaching, the peer networks, the communities of practice they need. You can't really network someone enough in an organization. And I think contracting with people at the beginning about these are my expectations of you in this 6 months and having that two-way dialogue is really important. And I think also, it's about judging how long does somebody really need to onboard as well? Is it before we expect them to be able to deliver in this role? And if it's something that you need someone to perhaps deliver on quicker, it's worth looking at your internal pool and your internal bench, because that person doesn't need to acclimatize, and come in from the outside. And if you think about the fact that they say minimum now it's $20,000 to replace someone, that's at very junior levels, and it gets much higher when you have executive search, that you have to really think very carefully about whether someone has failed in a new role, or maybe they're not in the right place, maybe they weren't given the right supports, and what do they need to thrive.
And I'm sure if you are coming from outside and you have been giving, say, a target of, okay, by month 3, you need to deliver X, and there isn't a two-way dialogue, or the person is afraid to rock the boat for any way because then it's a reflection on their output, how would you advise for them to make it known or to be empowered to say, actually, I need, say, 6 months instead because of whatever parameters are in place?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of people speaking up. I think leaders can handle bad news, but they can't handle surprises. And I find that when I've been in a new role, what's been most helpful for me is when I say, you might not like what I'm going to say here, but I want to explain why this is going to be delayed. And here are the factors 1, 2, and 3, and I want to be honest and upfront with you. And of course, that takes a level of psychological safety. And that is really just another name for rewarded vulnerability. So people have to take that leap of faith sometimes to be a bit vulnerable. And as leaders, you have to reward that candor from people coming in. And I know, look, it's easier at times for certain genders and people from certain geographies to speak up. And starting a new role, I would advise people to stay very close to their new leader, even if it seems very basic and very kind of project management 101 with status reports. But you really need to protect yourself and protect the company in these initial stages.
You mentioned a couple of times about this idea of having a coach. I'd like to just explore that a little bit with you. So the higher you go up the seniority level, would you encourage people for them to have an external coaching source that you can use to support you? What's your thoughts on this? Because I think this is probably a new concept to a lot of people.
I would. I think that any route you can get for learning, you should take. And a coach is an incredible source of learning for you if you approach it in the right way. A lot of people see coaches or coaching as remedial or punitive. You did something wrong, you need a coach. Whereas I see it as performance elevating, performance enhancing. It's the sign of someone who wants to continuously grow. And I think recruiting a coach is a great thing if you understand that their responsibility will be to ask you good questions. A good coach uses the Socratic method. They ask good questions and they will help you think more deeply and more pervasively on a problem. They're not there to solve a problem. They're not there to fix something for you that isn't going well. But I think that would be almost robbing you of the opportunity to grow. And most people that I know that are working with a coach, and by the way, it's, like finding a therapist. Sometimes you need to audition about 6 of them to make sure that you have the chemistry with them. So don't think that your first coach will be the right match for you. But once the chemistry's there and the trust is there, you can really see very sustained performance elevation. And there's very interesting ways now that coaching is evolving that you can actually start to measure it.
That's really interesting. We've just completed a course on authentic leadership, and it was majority around relationship management. And a large part of what we were talking about was in relation to what you just mentioned about zooming out and asking yourself the right questions. And I think this is very much where the coach comes in, because there was a piece that we were discussing around as a leader being empathetic and compassionate. And in order to be more compassionate, you need to have this ability to zoom out. And I think if you're struggling with that, then I think to employ someone to help you take a more pragmatic approach to the situations that you're dealing with when it comes to people, I think would be a really good thing to do. As a part of our school, we offer our executives coaching. The uptake is really low, in my opinion, because it's my responsibility to facilitate this. And I'm continuously pushing these executives to be like, whether you think you need it or not, please just do it, even if it's just one session, because you don't know what this is going to unlock, because you don't know what you don't know. And they're like, but they never carve out that time. They never seek it out as much as I would like them to. So I think you reinforcing this was a little bit of my own agenda for our audience, because I think it's important to hear it from someone who is using it successfully and what the benefit is for you as well. So thank you for sharing that.
I would also add that there is a bit of a polarity there between how the executive is perceived and how they perceive themselves as being the person that must have all the answers, and perhaps asking questions and needing to learn and not being sure of what to do and what to say all the time could also be seen as a vulnerability that a lot of people are not willing to accept at that level. And that's okay. They're also humans, and they're also operating in this very fast-paced world of work when things change so fast, and they don't necessarily need to have the answers, but they need to know how to figure out the answers and how to include others in figuring out the answers, and that is their team. So we also play a role in helping the executive figure out the answers, and that's okay. So I think that's also important to kind of know.
Yeah, the more I learn, the less I know.
Yeah.
In your experience, how can senior external candidates communicate their value to get in? Because if you're already preempting that, you know, almost 50% of external hires are going to fail, what is it that people are looking for from an external candidate, and how can someone who wants to set themselves up to be that ideal person, in your opinion?
It's a good question. I think you really need to be able to articulate your value proposition. What's your unique selling point? And I think going into an organization, you could be, you know, as an external candidate, you could be pitted against an internal candidate. So what do you bring that they don't have? And I think maybe de-risking it, showing evidence of where you've made an executive transition beforehand and you've managed to acculturate at pace. Maybe also showing the benefits of fresh thinking, bringing the outside in, you know, ideas that you already have about the company and what they could do to operate in new space, be more efficient, innovations that you might have made elsewhere. And I think there's another concept as well that they can bring in, which is this concept of the T model, which is that a lot of high-powered executives now have deep expertise in one domain, but they have reasonable, good generalist knowledge in a lot of other domains. You see this in HR, for example. You might have a specialist in TR, but they can work across TA, executive development. And to say to people that, you know, what you're getting with me is someone who can pivot. So you can bring me in this role, but then you can see that I acculturate at pace, so you can bring me into another role, and I'm helping others learn and grow as well. You know, I lift as I rise.
And just to piggyback onto this, because we're in a region at the moment that is accelerating really quickly, and it's a place where a lot of people want to live, work, and the competition is extremely high. So if we have someone who has lived in the UAE, let's say for 20 years, and, you know, at the top of their game, but they're not quite C-level, and they want to kind of get into that C-level role, what advice could you give to them? Because I feel like the UAE specifically hires for like. Okay, this person can fit the bill 100% because they have access to global talent, and it's so competitive. Everybody kind of wants to live and work here for various reasons. How does someone compete against a like for like?
Yeah, I think it goes back to being able to articulate your value proposition and working on your influencing skills so that you're able to convey your power or something that you hold very uniquely, and how you can join that up with making money for the company, essentially, or growing people. So sometimes you do get people that want carbon copies. You do get people that are not so avant-garde in their thinking about hiring. But I think we all have a job to educate them, show people examples of where this has worked really, really well before. And, you know, especially for women, you have to back yourself. Really, you have to back yourself. And I think that's really important. And sometimes we can be very humble And we should remember that we have a lot to offer.
Definitely.
Absolutely. And actually, to that point of conveying your influence and your leadership skills and kind of translating that into something that the new employer kind of wants to have. When we're looking at a macro level, actually leadership and social influence, according to the World Economic Forum, are going to be among the top 4 essential skills for successful workers in the next 5 years, alongside creative and analytical thinking and, of course, big data and AI. So what's your insight, Jo, on what type of leadership style works really well in this region, in Dubai versus global? And can you also tell us a bit about the contagion effect, where you mentioned that leadership kind of multiplies and why that's important in every organization?
Yeah, I think this is a really important question. I'm so glad you mentioned the World Economic Forum, because they're always on the money when talking about the skills of the future. And I'm so glad the conversation's now starting to pivot a little bit more to not just AI literacy, but what are those uniquely human skills that we hope that AI can't replace, and focusing people on compassion, empathy, radical kindness, collaboration. And, I get asked a lot about what leadership style I think works best. And for me, I think there is no single leadership style that works best. And I've always liked the situational or adaptive leadership approach, which basically says how you act as a leader is dependent on the person that you work with and the situation that you're in. Sometimes in a crisis, you need to lead from the front, and you don't have the time to coach people, ask them questions. But sometimes you'll have a very high performer. You just need to hire them, get out of their way, and you lead from the back. You're there to coach. You're there to give feedback. You're there to inspire and help. And I think Dubai is such a beautiful, eclectic melting pot of different cultures, people with different backgrounds, different skill sets, even the types of company and the startup scene we have here now. It would be kind of almost criminal to say you can nurture that all with one single leadership approach. I think there's a beauty to cultivating your own leadership approach that speaks to your proclivity and skills, but also remembers that we're dealing with humans, and that's going to be all we have.
I think we were just talking about it over the weekend, and we were recommended that as leaders, we should master about 3 to 4 different styles, 3 to 4 out of 6. And really, like you said, kind of change between them based on the situation, based on the person in front of us. But we really need to invest our time and effort first into really understanding what each leadership style has to offer, pros and cons, what are the benefits, what are the limitations with each approach, and then kind of make a decision on which one you're going to use. So that's something really good for people to take away. So maybe do a little assessment on what is your kind of default leadership style, and what are the gaps, and what do you need to fill in order to get to those 3 to 4 that you master really well. And then if we zoom in really quickly on social influence. Now, we've talked a lot about influencers in the marketing space, and that's kind of a different thing. But how would we define social influence at the C level, or for someone aspiring to get to C level? What does that actually look like for you when you're looking to help people?
Yeah, it's really about your ability to guide and inspire people in an organization. Because often when you're working with peers, they don't have a reporting line to you. Whether they choose to follow you or do something that you recommend really lies within your ability to use your social equity to guide people. And the best way that I often find to do that is to really think about change with, not change to. So if you're thinking about a new policy, a new framework, a new way of approaching something, a new innovation, before you go too far down the road, sit with people and say, what do you think? Do you want to be part of this? How might you do it? What am I not seeing here? What are my blind spots? Can you give me some feedback and advice? How would you do this? And I think that openness is generally wins you a lot more kind of collaboration than being, go solo. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
Go together.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Amazing. And to kind of wrap up the conversation, in your opinion, what are some priority learning areas that leaders need to focus on to ensure that their company will remain competitive in the future? Because things are changing so fast right now, and all of us need to upskill. What are some core areas where you think, at least in this region, we need to really look at and kind of bridge those gaps?
I think that those skills that the AI will find it most difficult to replace are the ones that we need to be thinking about. So things like empathy, compassion, care are important. But I think as companies, globally, and especially in Dubai, we probably underinvest in communication. I really do think your role is 80% communication and 20% your kind of area of expertise. And I think being able to articulate your point in a very structured way, being able to not monologue, but seek input, be very crisp and clear, even in the way we write emails. I think this is such an undervalued skill. And when people do it well, they can really build that followership that I think is critical. And even, you see it's so easy to spot these days when emails are written by ChatGPT. They're so verbose and Shakespearean. And I think it's so beautiful now when you see an authentic leader who is able to communicate. It's becoming rarer and rarer. And I think we really need to double down on our skill as communicators.
I love that. We see it from very early careers all the way up to the top, just due to the nature of our work. And I think this is something that, if there was something that I wanted to push from this conversation, I think it would be that, because it's totally undervalued. I think we were discussing the other day that, eventually we think that emails will be a thing of the past, just the way that the new generations are communicating with each other. So the fact that you've kind of placed emphasis on this, I think, is really fascinating, because I think that, especially the way we communicate on like WhatsApp and, all the kind of platforms that you have, it's going to become a bit of a lost art.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's bring it back.
I agree, yeah.
I'll add one more thing there. And Jo, tell me if I'm allowed or not allowed to disclose this. But I was going to say it's very important to add a bit of personality in your communications as well. And especially as a leader, you need to put people at ease. And I was going to share that I got an email from Jo yesterday, and it literally said whatever the message was, and it says, "Message by Jo, typos by iPhone." And it really cracked me up. It was hilarious. I thought that, that's an excellent point, because typos are real. Yeah. But also it was funny, and it showed a lot about you as a person beyond the message of whatever we're communicating about. And I think it's so important to have that as well.
Oh, thank you. It's so important to bring humor into work. Yeah. I think levity helps break down silos, increases bonds. And yeah, I'm a militant about typos. So whenever I make any, I'm like, that's the iPhone, not me.
I think that's a really lovely place for us to wrap up today. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. There's so many valuable nuggets in this conversation that we've had today that I think people are going to take away and feel inspired by when they're looking to kind of make that next transition. Before we wrap up the main episode, I'd like to share with you the wildcard question, which we will unpack on our bonus episode. So, Jo, as a C-level professional, what does managing up look like amongst your fellow chiefs?
Ooh, an interesting one.
Yeah. Thank you again for your time. We really enjoyed it.
Thank you both. It's a wonderful podcast, and I'm thrilled that you thought of me. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for everything you shared.